Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Got Stephen Carter on the program, a prolific author, conservative intellectual. And what I think is cool is that you're a black conservative intellectual, which, you know, according to the mainstream media is virtually impossible. And delighted to have you on the program. I've been very excited about getting you on. Been looking for reasons to get you on for quite some time. You've got a new book that we will talk about in passing. But I also want to talk about some of your other work as well. Welcome to the program, sir.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, of your works, my favorite of your works was the Reflections of an Affirmative Action Baby. I have to tell you, that's probably my favorite of all the things I've read by you. And it's really the book that kind of puts you on the map on a public policy perspective, isn't it?
I suppose so. That was a long time ago, and it's interesting because I still come across a lot of people who want to talk about that, although I have to confess that most of my work and my research over the last 10 years or so has been more in the religious freedom area than the area of race and affirmative action and so on.
Yeah, and that has become a hot spot. We seem to be, in my opinion, we seem to be kind of in trouble in that area. We seem to be completely ignoring the complete narrative of U.S. history when it comes to religious freedom, and kind of developed a whole new view of religious freedom, where it seems like the state is to be protected from the church rather than what the original intent of the Founding Fathers were.
I'm very worried about the state of religious freedom in the United States today. I do believe in the separation of church and state, but if you do look back how that phrase was used a couple of hundred years ago and among the founders, it was very clear that what they thought was that the state should stay away from the church. It was the church that needed protection, and the wall of separation was to allow the church to go about its business without being interfered with. Nowadays, whether you think about the HHS mandate or all sorts of other laws that are passed, it's as though the government sees religion as an impediment, something that keeps the state from getting its way. And when the state begins to behave that way, it's showing very little respect for religious freedom.
Yeah, no question about it. And, and although, when you look at the history, I don't think a lot of people know their history. There's this narrative. I think most historians in this country are consensus historians. And the reality is there's always been a clashing of worldviews, be it Thomas Jefferson versus Alexander Hamilton, who agreed with each other on virtually nothing, yet they're both considered founding fathers. We take the simplistic approach, we gravitate towards certain ones, and we develop entire political systems around that. Talk about that.
You know, if you look at the First Amendment of the Constitution, it's striking that the very first subject is religious freedom. That was the first and most important concern, the thing the framers worried most about somehow being overborne. And it's important to understand that religious freedom, correctly understood, creates a little space, a little world in which religious people are free of the pressure of the state to go about trying to live their lives according to God's will. The irony is that as recently as the 1990s, when Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, it was seen as a big liberal cause to protect religious freedom, and now somehow things have become so twisted around in the last 10 or 15 years that religious freedom seems to get in the way of too many liberal programs.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and it's an interesting situation, an interesting agenda. And you look at U.S. history, I don't think most Americans realize this, but actually all the states, with the exception of Pennsylvania and Rhode Island, actually had state-recognized religions. The last state to give up their state-recognized religion was Massachusetts in the 1830s. And they recognized the Puritans as their recognized religion. It's kind of interesting to see how we went from that view. In the 1830s, that's 50 years after our Constitution, they still existed. And that just showed you how greatly insulated the church was from the federal government.
Well, it's interesting. You can there's a concrete example. If you think about education, for example, that if you look at the late 19th century, it wasn't until the establishment of the Catholic schools in America in the late 19th century that people began to complain about public money going for private education. Before that, a lot of public money went to support private schools, and then suddenly, when the Catholics began to build their own schools because they were worried about what was being taught in the public schools, all of a sudden people began to complain that it was wrong to give public money to private education, especially religious education. But that's not an ancient American tradition. That's something that was invented as a kind of anti-Catholic bias in the late 19th century.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a very good point. And, and the Catholics have, most of those schools were developed by Jesuits, and Jesuits have a long history of using the education for evangelical purposes, using that word evangelical in a rather twisted way, I guess. But, I guess I can see that, but I agree with you entirely. What would be stopping other Christian churches, or even those who don't have a Christian worldview, institutions, to create those private institutions? Nothing, and so it is kind of twisted when you look at it.
Well, unfortunately, we do live in a world where there's a lot of pressure for a secularist view, and not a secularist neutral view, but a secularist view that's anti-religion, to the point where you have a number of cases in schools when students write book reports and essays and so on in public schools, and they're told, but of course you can't use a religious text for the basis of your book report. You can use any other book you like. Or students were not allowed to bring in religious items to show and tell when their classmates are bringing in various other things for their hobbies and so on. Those cases arise all the time, and that's not an attitude of neutrality by the state. That's an anti-religious attitude by the state, and it's extremely dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. A lot of these things were meant to be left to the citizens and the states. You look at the 9th and 10th Amendment, and that's pretty explicitly clear. And somehow along the way, the federal government became supreme, and it developed principles and views that were hostile, really, to the interests of localities, which are often dominated by certain religious groups, and they should be able to enjoy that religious freedom. That was always been the American tradition.
Well, there was a great problem in American history, of course, with the massive resistance to segregation, and a lot of the view about the role of the federal government vis-a-vis the states built up during that era. But it's important to remember that that fight was won, and that the arguments that we needed to make about the necessity of overriding state views because of segregation, that battle is over, and the same arguments don't apply to everything. There ought to be a lot of areas, I believe, where we leave questions to state and even local government, because, when people feel close to their government, when they see in the food store and at the soccer game the parents of their friends' kids, and those are the people who make the ordinances and laws that govern them, they have a very different view about the value of government, and also the people who are doing the regulating have a very different view if they live close to the people they're regulating.
Yep. It's Professor Stephen Carter. He is at Yale University, multi-time New York Times best-selling author. Our guest today. Real quickly, your new book. Tell us real quickly about that, your latest.
There's a novel that I've written that's out called The Church Builder, which I wrote under a pseudonym. It's not under Stephen Carter. It's under A.L. Shields. And I guess the simplest way to put it is that it's a thriller and a murder mystery, but that's really about religious freedom and about this secular religious battle.
Yeah, and it certainly is a ferocious one. And when did that come out, sir?
Oh, it's just been published recently.
Yeah, very good. In fact, I'm looking at StephenCarter.com, StephenCarterBooks.com, and I don't see it there yet, but I'm sure it'll be coming soon. Great author. Love the work that you do, and I hope you continue to do it, sir.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it, and good luck to you, too.
You bet. StephenCarterBooks.com. Make sure you check that out. Been wanting to have Professor Carter on my program for a long time, and so glad he was able to spend some time with us here today. All right, that's today's program. Do want to remind you the best content here shows up over there at USDailyReview.com. While there, make sure you like it on Facebook and follow it on Twitter. I hope you have a great Turkey Day tomorrow, and look forward to being with you for another Price of Business.